It takes a brave man in his publicity materials to pose in a Speedo. And for our featured guest today, that picture and the meaning behind it, I think, holds a much greater meaning than the actual Lycra that he's put on. And thankfully, as we speak, Adam Hill is not in Speedo, as far as I can tell. We are here to talk about his book, Shifting Gears, and the story behind it. So let me say first, welcome, Adam. How are you? Welcome to the Big Impact.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. And yeah, I am fully pantsed today. So
I can honestly say that in the hundreds of episodes of the Big Impact that we've done, we've never had the phrase "I'm fully pantsed today." So we've broken new ground here.
I'm glad I could be a frontiersman on that front. So.
Yeah. Well, the book is called Shifting Gears, and for you, my understanding is that really is the story of your life. You were headed in a direction very different than the triathlete sitting here before me. So let me kind of open the stage up to you to share the overall broad story, and then we'll dig into it a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, definitely do not come from a background of triathlon or athletics whatsoever. I was back in high school, a second string bench warmer for the baseball team that went 0-10 for the JV season. So no athletic background. In fact, I grew up really excelling at anxiety. That was my big forte.
They don't give varsity letters for that, I don't think.
No, certainly not. and yeah, so I grew up something of a bit of a worrywart with some social anxiety. Before I even really knew what that meant or what it was or anybody talked about it out in the open. So I never really connected myself with having an anxiety disorder of any kind. In my early life, that anxiety took me into some pretty dark places. Once I got into my 20s, I started drinking. When I discovered alcohol, and alcohol is essentially a cure for my anxiety, something that would relieve it immediately. And obviously that took me down a very dark path for the next decade or so, where I was balancing the anxiety I would experience with the drinking problem that I had developed until, I was in a point where I had to get sober, or, I realized that I would either die or be incarcerated for the rest of my life. And that was, my bottom that forced me, fortunately, into a decision to turn my life around with the help of many, many other very wonderful people, and eventually get into the sport of triathlon, where, I put some of my obsessive nature to the test and really took it far in my life.
It's so powerful to look back at those key moments in life where a decision made one direction or another impacts the next couple decades. Yeah. When you think about the beginning of the drinking and the obsessive, unhealthy habits and those kind of things, was there a moment where it all kind of veered off in the direction that you wish it hadn't? Was there like a single moment in your history?
Yeah, if you had asked me when, well, there were a few moments like that. And I think the first one was when I took my first drink of alcohol. And if you'd asked me then, or if you'd sent me back in time and said, don't drink that alcohol because, that's going to cause your life to go in a terrible direction, I would have said, well, wait, you're me from the future. What are you doing here? This is awesome. But then I would have said to myself, I don't have a problem. There's no problems in our family, and frankly, this is working for me. There's no evidence, because at the very beginning, that first drink I took, it immediately took that anxiety away, and I became just more social. And it was just an absolute positive for me. It took, time for that to develop into a problem. And then the second instance that really turned my life off course was my first panic attack. And that was an experience where up until that point, I had this kind of bubbling or festering anxiety that sat just below the surface, that was always just either manifested as worry or some kind of awkwardness in social situations, but never really went to the extreme of, oh my gosh, I'm crazy. And that was when I was studying for an organic chemistry examination, which in and of itself would cause anxiety. But in this case, it was just a completely random event where I had this experience of just extreme terror that wasn't, it had no rhyme or reason. In fact, it was tied to my health at the time. I thought that for some reason I was sick. In fact, I thought I was HIV positive for some reason, for no reason whatsoever. And I just collapsed on the floor, paralyzed from fear at that moment. And it was an absolute panic attack, not knowing what it was. I went to the doctor, found out that I wasn't, HIV positive or anything like that. But it began a series of panic attacks over the next few years that would paralyze me in those moments and really terrorize me and cause that kind of trauma in my life. The only cure that I could find at the time that would really help was alcohol. And so I doubled down on that and continued to drink heavily.
Away from this microphone and some other parts of my professional life, I actually work with rescue missions around the country and help them in their messaging and their fundraising. And earlier today, one of the reasons you and I are a tad bit later at our scheduled time than we expected is I was doing interviews with a rescue mission in Indiana. And I talked to two different men today, both of whom were at the mission having been released from prison and paroled there. And they were in prison because of basically addiction and then what they were doing illegally with it. And I asked them the same kind of question that I just asked you, which was there that moment? Because in their cases, there were some deep pains that they were trying to numb. And we know that oftentimes that's what addiction is designed to do, is just help it all go away for a little while. Mm-hmm. And you'd like to think at the time, okay, well, that felt good for that hour, but I can stop whenever I want to. It doesn't work that way, right? It really can take its hold. It can put its claws into you. And for all of the numbing of the pain, I guess that would be, if you were to put that in the positive side of the ledger column, the negative side goes infinitely higher because I think it can just ruin every aspect of your life, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it slowly and methodically does that. One of the things that the phrases that really latched on to me was first it's fun, then it's fun with problems, and then it's just problems. And by the time it's fun with problems, typically that problem is so ingrained in you that it's hard to break that habit. And for me, that was definitely the case. And by the time it was fun with problems, it became such that it was helping with the anxiety in the immediate term. But when I would wake up or come to the next morning, my anxiety would be through the roof because it's just the nature of how thinking of what did I do, or I was in a blackout. I was so against my values at that point that it was just making my anxiety worse. So it was, so that was a problem. And I think one of the things that caused me a lot of shame too was this idea that I didn't really have anything else that was traumatizing in my life. And I think this is an important point for people who feel ashamed about feeling ashamed. In other words, they're drinking to help with this anxiety that they think that they shouldn't have because their life is somewhat good. I was going to school on a beach in a lovely place. I had two parents who loved me. I grew up in a safe and healthy environment. There was no reason for me to feel this way, yet I did. And so there was a lot of shame around that.
Well, it can take on a number of different manifestations. The deeper you get into it, whether it's panic attacks or whether it's the addiction, when that stuff gets out of control and the snowball at the top of the mountain becomes an avalanche at the bottom, my understanding is that you feel like you've got no chance, like the world's closing in on you. I've heard it described by one person that at the beginning, you're trying to find a way to fit your addiction into your life. And then shortly thereafter, you're trying to figure out how to fit your life into your addiction because it has become the dominant priority. And you describe in some of your background information at the age of 33, you had a physique that could be described as Sasquatch with a dad bod. So apparently the anxiety and the other stuff really added up to take its toll on you physically too.
It did. Yeah. Over time, I mean, I was a smoker. I drank a lot, obviously. I didn't take care of my diet or anything. So even after I did get sober, I continued a lot of those unhealthy habits, because there's a saying in recovery that you don't want to make any major life changes your first year in sobriety. And, a lot of people in recovery, I wanted to immerse myself in that community. And that was one of the things that saved my life. But, a lot of people are hanging out by the smoking section. I became one of those people. So I just kind of doubled down on the unhealthy habits. Plus the Sasquatch reference, I'm a really hairy dude as well. So
well, now that I can relate to, it's just not on the top of my head.
Right.
Well, for people who are just listening to us and not watching the video version, the Adam Hill that I'm looking at right now is in really good shape. I'm not going to guess numbers because I'm terrible at it, but you're very fit. That's why the triathlete is part of your biography now. And so at some point you had this light bulb moment, whether you said it or somebody else said it, Adam, it's time for a change, or maybe you're not going to be around very long. When did that happen?
It happened in an instant that was at my absolute bottom. And there's always a worse bottom for people who are in addiction, meaning that if I have another drink, I will probably have to go down to a worse bottom to achieve that. But the bottom that I've hit that God willing is my bottom was a DUI accident where I had broken the last rule that I had set for myself. In other words, I'd always set a number of rules for myself to essentially make sure that I was in control of my life, and I was in control
of your out of control life.
Absolutely, yeah. And so those included, make sure I'm going to work every day. If I'm going and I'm being a productive member of society, I don't have a problem. Make sure I don't drink before 5 p.m. because, that's when alcoholics drink, is before 5 p.m. And make sure I'm only drinking on the weekends. I was like this, I was like an alcoholic gremlin kind of in that way. But the one rule that I would never, ever want to break for myself was don't drink and drive, because I just abhorred that. I hated people that would be so, inconsiderate of other people's lives, until one day I was so out of control. I was in a blackout and I had driven, and I got into a DUI accident that fortunately nobody was injured in. And, coming to in the back of a police car, wondering what had happened, scared of what I had done in this blackout, and realizing at that very moment that I had zero control over my life. And I was not only a danger to myself, which I could live with, I was a danger to other people. And I was doing more harm than good on this world. And so in jail that night, that's where I had the decision to make of in my mind was, I've either got to end my life, or I just want to die, or I've got to get help, and I've got to get this, get better on this. And fortunately, I took the latter course and did seek help, and I did absolutely everything that I was told in the rooms of recovery.
Did you ever come close to the other decision, to ending it all?
I had never tried, and but in that jail cell was probably the closest I've ever come to wanting to go in that direction, and it was frightening because those feelings of wanting suicide, there's a hopelessness that's so powerful that it's just, you really feel like there's no other way out. And so I would reach out to anybody who's feeling that way at this moment and say that there is always hope and there's always help. And regardless of whatever situation you've put yourself in, or whatever situation you have that has been put on you, or that you feel like it's so overwhelming, there's always a miracle somewhere on the other side of that. So, yeah.
Well, I'm very interested in the route that you took in your total transformation. And I say that because there are different choices you could make there. You could have said, hey, it's time for me to get things under control. There's no more drinking. I'm going to get into the gym. I'm going to get in shape. Awesome. And then there's the side that says, I am going to become a world-class triathlete. And that part blows my mind. It was a couple of years ago on this program, I interviewed a gentleman by the name of Greg Nance, recovering from addiction to cocaine and other things. Greg became an ultra marathoner, and he's I think he's in the Guinness book, 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 different continents. And
Wow.
none of this makes sense to me. I don't even know how the airfare works for all of that. So, it's kind of mind blowing. And what you're doing is what you have done and what you continue to do is equally mind blowing. And I'm guessing that's the motivation for shifting gears. That's the name of the book that we're discussing. So when you got to the point where it was time for something very different, how did you land on triathlete?
That's a great question. And it goes back to when I was still in my alcoholism, active alcoholism. Back in probably about 2006 was the first time I saw the Ironman World Championship on television, just randomly on a Saturday afternoon. I was watching these people that were swimming these amazing distances. The announcer said even 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, and then a 26-mile run. I couldn't even fathom the 2-mile swim, but when he said over 100 miles of biking, I was just like, how do they do that? And then a marathon on top of that in the same day. I was just like, these people are crazy. I mean,
yes, they are.
There's no question. But I kept watching and I was inspired and just by the scenery of Hawaii and the beauty of it all. And then they get into the backstories of some of these people and they're talking about, people that are doctors or lawyers or teachers or normal people that are living everyday lives or who have overcome significant challenges or are doing these really inspiring things. And I thought to myself at that moment, it just lit this fire, this spark in my mind at that moment that said, I would love to do something like that. And then just as quickly as it came, my mind, which was in a terrible state at that point, just said, no, you can't do that. That's not you. There's just no way. So it just shut down. And then I went back to, my old habits for, the next many years until that point when I was sober. And I was always told in sobriety by my sponsor and by people that are in sobriety, again, don't make any major life changes for that first year. And that stuck with me, but I heard it differently. I heard it as when you reach a year, make a major life change. So maybe it was not the way I was supposed to hear it, but in my mind, it was that. And so that the atmosphere that was kind of bred around that, the environment of being, of having worked on myself from the spiritual and mental standpoint and having a better mindset around things and having done something that I thought I could never do. I never thought that I could get sober, but I did, and with the help of a community. And I, at that point, it just kind of entered my mind, and I don't really remember how it entered my mind, but the idea of the Ironman triathlon came into my mind, and I was like, maybe I can do it. Maybe what if I could? And so I asked a different question.
Well, you set these goals, and it doesn't mean it's going to come automatically just because you're determined. I mean, that is a grueling test of physical excellence. I might be able to do the swim because I usually, I can swim a mile, so maybe I could work up to double it. The other stuff's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And at the point in your life when you decided to do these things, let's talk just physical. How far away physically were you from even running 1 mile, let alone a marathon at the end of a grueling long day? Were you still Sasquatch at this point?
Yeah, I was definitely Sasquatch at that point. But I could probably muster out a mile. Yeah. I had run a little bit in the past, but not by any standards of trying to of anything structured. Like I would hear about a 10K or maybe a half marathon and train for a few months and then just kill myself trying to do it. That was kind of the nature of my physical exercise. Was I would do something for 90 days and then burn myself out and then never do it again, and go back to unhealthy habits. So at that time I hadn't been exercising for well over a couple of years, and I'd never swam really any more organized than the length of a pool. I had surfed in the past, but I'd mainly stuck to shore break and stuff. So I'd never really swam out, and the idea of swimming 2 miles in the open ocean was crazy to me. I didn't even own a road bike, so I'd never ridden a bike like that before. So yeah, I had a lot of work to do on that front.
Well, how hard was it? How long did it take you before you thought, okay, I have a chance at this? I'm not there yet, but I have a chance.
It didn't take too long because I had the belief in myself at that point. And what I realized was that if there's people out there that are starting this later in life and who have never done that, and there are plenty of stories about that, then certainly why couldn't I? And when I did the research and when I looked into it, I realized that training for an Ironman is a lot different than, say, going to the gym or lifting weights or trying to go for the bench pressing world championship. There's an element of training your aerobic fitness, which is slower, easier. Yes, it's a longer period of time, but the exercise is much less intense. And so that helped me, and a person like me who injures myself or is terrible at sports and things like that and is not aggressive. From what I found on that front was that's the type of fitness that worked for me, that easy aerobic stuff. So all it took was I just have to be able to, do that for a longer period of time. And it became my meditation. So training for 2-3 hours when I got to that level on the bike, it became a meditation, it became a chance to get outside. And yeah.
Which of those three components proved to be the hardest?
I think the hardest for me was the swimming. And that was really due to the anxiety, the fear. Because once you get into the open water, and I lived on the West Coast at the time, so I was swimming in the ocean, or swimming in a pool wasn't that tough, but it was the idea of swimming in the open water in the ocean, because that's where sharks live, or and it's murky, or that's where currents happen. And every time I would get out there, that irrational fear would start to bubble up again. And it would start to tell me things like, I'm going to be pulled out into the ocean. I'm never going to be seen again, or a shark's going to come and it's going to bite, my head off, or all these crazy thoughts. So I had to learn to manage that and to really control my breathing and manage the panic on that too.
Well, it leads me to the question about the battle between physical and mental. I don't know how you could escape that battle, especially in an ultra triathlon kind of a day where it's sun up to sundown. You're exerting everything you have in you. I don't know if you put them on a scale, which one wins? Which one's the more important component? You can't do all that without being physically fit, but what about mentally fit?
Yeah, I would say it's about 90% mental.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. The first step is really conquering that mindset and making sure that the mindset is powerful enough to overcome it, because the physical part's easy. You just train it every single day, and it's very static. Making sure you follow a plan and build on it every single for however long you need to, with discipline. But the discipline part, the consistency, the managing of the daily routine, the managing of the daily fires that your mind might put in front of you, or that life puts in front of you, that's the real challenge, because it's so variable. And there's a lot of training that goes into that, because self-doubt comes in, and all of these other things.
So you work, I know now, as a coach, as a trainer for other triathletes. Does everybody who's engaged in that endeavor face the same obstacles? I mean, is everybody getting to the halfway point and going, I just can't do it, and Coach Adam comes along and blows the whistle and has to kick them in the rear with the mental coaching?
Yeah, I'd say everybody faces some kind of mindset challenge in these races, and that's what's wonderful about about specifically Ironman, is because it's something that everybody can do. Anybody can do it, but the challenge in our minds is so hard to overcome, because we don't think we can, but anybody can. And so I think everybody faces some sort of mindset issue, but there's differences between everybody. Some people may have challenges with the bike. Some people may have challenges with just the competition aspect. Some people may have the challenge of wanting so badly just to win, and that's something that they have to overcome. So it all gets back to trying to train your mind to get back to that fundamental place of doing this to continuously grow within ourselves, to continuously improve, and just become better people today than we were yesterday. And that's really the whole purpose of it.
Well, you earned some pretty cool honors and distinctions. The distinction of USA Triathlon All-American Ironman All-World Athlete. You're featured in Ironman Quest for Kona in 2017. You get to what I would consider to be sort of the after picture. If the before picture was Adam Hill lost in addiction and wondering if life was worth living, if we smash cut to the after picture and you're receiving these accolades, and then you're asked to start instructing, coaching, and mentoring other athletes and maybe other addicts.
Mhm.
Did you ever have a moment where you went where you looked back and thought, I'm just stunned that I'm still here, let alone thriving like this?
Every single day. I mean, still to this day, I have to look back and I deliberately tell myself how grateful I need to be for where I'm at today, because everywhere I'm at right now is on borrowed time. It's grace. It's because of grace that I'm here
Yeah.
today. Yeah.
Well, I'm a big believer that the Lord has a plan for every one of us. And we often can
Absolutely.
lose sight of that when we get distracted by things He didn't intend for us to be distracted by. We talk quite often about faith here on the Big Impact, and I'm not afraid to go right to Scripture, because there are so many passages that talk about, I know I have a plan for you, a plan to prosper you and not to harm you. We know that if we will follow the path that is laid out for us, then He will guide us.
Mhm.
And when you sat down at the keyboard to put together Shifting Gears, I have to wonder how hard it was in some of those chapters to look back on where you were. Because most of the time, when you're in recovery and when you're striving to leave that behind, the last thing you want to do is go back and relive it so that you can share it in a powerful way with a potential audience, whether it's on a platform or in a book. How hard was it to look back at the before picture?
It's very hard. And I mean, even to this day, it's challenging for me, because it's something that does start to bubble up that shame of, who I once was. But it's also it's certainly a good reminder for me of what I have been, because of, and what can happen again if I go down the wrong path. And, what's important to me is I understand the importance of anonymity for a lot of people in their recovery, and that's sacred. Uh, for me, I found that sharing my stories in any way that I can over time, and through triathlon and things like that, has been a way for me to practice that recovery that I need. And so selfishly, it helps me stay accountable when I'm making it part of my identity that I am a sober person that's trying to continue to level up in these ways. And it reminds me where I need to go back to, which is back to my faith, back to, the grace that I know that I have, back to the gratitude that I should have for just being here today. So yeah, it was difficult, but it was also just as anything that's challenging, it has its rewards on that front.
You're well aware of the reality that there are millions of books available these days. And I don't know that our audience or audiences in general appreciate the work that it takes to put one of those things together. It is not like you just sat down with a tape recorder and there was a transcription that came out and somebody glued all the pages together and here's your book. This had to be, just from a pure process standpoint, a few years at least in the making, and all these different revisions and reviews and proofreading, and how'd you put a comma there, and how'd you do? So when it's all done and you got the first box of Shifting Gears, what did it feel like?
It's well, interestingly, I haven't gotten a box yet. Still waiting on it. But seeing it, but yeah, it did take a few years to write this. I mean, it was 4 years in the making, and a lot of different revisions, a lot of layouts, a lot of people looking at it, and a lot of really helpful feedback, because it is a confusing industry, let me tell you. But just seeing it go live, and seeing it available on Amazon, and seeing that it's out there in the world. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming in a good way. It's overwhelming in a scary way. It's overwhelming in a exciting way. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it out there and holding it in my hands at some point too.
What's the number one thing you really pray people will take away from the book?
Hope. I really hope that they'll take away hope, that there's hope in any situation. And I know that, my story and a lot of what I've been through doesn't even begin to hold a candle to some of the trauma and experiences that, I've heard from other people who have gone through. But I do know that there's always hope on the other side of these things. And even if it feels hopeless, that we can, we could find a miracle on the other side. And that's really what I hope for people, is that they're able to get at least that from part of my story.
Well, Adam, it's very inspiring stuff, and I'm so glad to have had the opportunity to learn, probably just scratching the surface of what your life has been like. And you know, I still can't wrap my head around the triathlon world. I still can't understand who thought of it first. Had to be some crazy, former Navy SEAL, but it's so popular because it represents such a level of dedication and commitment and achievement. I don't really care if you don't get the medal around your neck. If you finish and you get the t-shirt, or if you start and really give everything you have, I think that speaks volumes about the people who participate in that particular endeavor. So as a coach, I would have to think that your world's fairly busy these days.
Yeah, it's incredibly fulfilling to see other athletes, come get to their own finish line. I love that part more than anything else. That just seeing that there was somebody that wanted to achieve something, and then they went out and did it and got that finish line. And not only that, but treated that finish line as their next starting line. That's the real fulfilling part. And that's what I love about triathlon, is that those finish lines can serve as the next starting line to whatever next adventure you want to take, or what have you. There's just so much, there's so much so much deeper to triathlon than this challenging event. But it is really, that there can really be a spiritual element to it. It's really fantastic.
I would have to think, in some respects, you need to launch a triathlete podcast and just give tips. Maybe you already have, but I mean, for that community, it's not going to be tens of millions of people, but it's going to be a group of people who are craving advice, because who could tackle such an endeavor on their own without any guidance? You can't just go out for a long bike ride and think you're ready for a triathlon. So, I'm not trying to give you more work. I'm just saying that the potential is there for even more impact and input.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'm always thinking of new ideas like that, and I think that that's a good one.
He's like, just let me get the book in my hands first.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
All right, friends. The book is called Shifting Gears. The author is Adam Hill. He's been our guest here on Big Impact. And Adam, thank you so much. Lord bless you, and stay safe out there.
Thank you. God bless as well. I appreciate it, Bill.